Hey, I'm Weilyn.
And I'm Allie. Welcome back to the Entrepreneurs Podcast, the podcast for and by women entrepreneurs. Every week, we share insightful and inspiring conversations with women entrepreneurs from around the world about their entrepreneurial journeys. To check out our past episodes and be notified on our future ones, subscribe to us on whatever podcast platform you're listening to us on now.
Today, we're chatting with Daphne, founder of the Vendry, a resource connecting planners with the best agencies, venues, and vendors for their events.
Get ready as we talk with Daphne about being entrepreneurial in the events marketplace, the nitty-gritty of networking, and building and maintaining connections.
Hello and welcome back to the Entrepreneurs Podcast. Today, we are super excited to have Daphne here with us on the pod. How are you doing today?
I'm great. It's Wednesday, middle of the week, you know?
Absolutely. The hump day, halfway there. The weekend is in sight. It's feeling good. To start us off, we're going to ask you a question that we ask all our podcast guests, which is, what excites you when you wake up in the morning?
Well, usually a 2-year-old's waking me up. And so the like real straightforward answer is that it's seeing my babies first thing in the morning. But yeah, the way I always put it, about being an entrepreneur is, I have my home life, I have my kids, I get them to school, and then also excited to walk to work, which is something I get to do here in New York, and build a company with the team here at the Vendry. I love my coworkers.
I absolutely love that. There's something so special about being able, first of all, to walk to work in New York City. I'm not sure about the weather in New York right now, but here at Princeton, the weather is really, really nice. And so just like even walking to classes and being able to do all of that is really, really exciting. Before we dive into your journey, we'd love to just read a little bit about you and read your bio, but also ask you what's something that most people don't know about you. Before we ask you that, we'll give a little introduction of you. So Daphne is the Vendry's founder, studied engineering, specifically Orphe in Princeton, and worked at a high-growth B2B company called Yext for the first 8 years of her career. There, she ran partnerships and was constantly hosting or attending business events of all types, where she was inspired to launch the Vendry after realizing how under-resourced the team planning these events were in sourcing both creative inspiration and the venues and vendors. So tell us a little bit about how you would pitch the Vendry, but also what's something that most people don't know about you?
Yeah, I'm a certified yoga instructor. So I don't think I've put that out there, but I am. Now, being a certified yoga instructor is very different from being a competent yoga instructor that teaches class. I am certified.
That's
yeah,
amazing.
I did that in Cape Town. It was cool for 6 weeks. Awesome. 200 hours of yoga in 6 weeks. So that's the fun fact that has very little to do with work.
Your favorite yoga pose?
Man, I wish I could do a handstand. I spent those 200 hours basically I got so close. I'll call that my favorite, but like never really got there. But I'm gonna get there one day.
Another favorite. So for those who don't know, the Vendry is a events marketplace platform where you're able to find host events, which I think is just incredible. And we're going to get into any of that. But before that, you are quite a seasoned events attendee and hoster, I will assume. What is the best event that you've ever been to?
Ooh. Well, the thing is, at Yext, I think in general, if you're in certainly the B2B market in sort of a public role, the way I was, sort of sales and partnerships, you go to a lot of events because B2B is a lot of relationships, sales. And so a lot of that happens in person at events. Trying to think what stands out the most. This is the interesting thing with events is a lot of times it's the location, right? Like a beautiful resort in Arizona, or I remember Cavallo Point in San Francisco. Like I went to a conference there and you're on this old, I think it's an old Navy, houses for the Navy. I'm forgetting the word. But Cavallo Point, have either of you been there? It's incredible. So that's interesting as relates to event design, because the places that first come to memory are like the hotels and the locations of those events. And then I think for anybody sort of in the broader tech sector, I've been to CES, and I was early in my career. And I mean, that is just sort of a marquee industry event with so many people. It was very cool. Vegas is special.
My dad works kind of tangentially in the tech business. And so when I was little, he would be like, I'm on my way to CES. And it was always this thing in January, like right when winter break ended, and he'd go and he'd send us this picture of like this huge exhibition hall. And he went this year, and for the first time in years, it was pretty much empty, which is crazy because of COVID. And so this like sight of, packed exhibition hall was now just like a couple people here and there, which was kind of a crazy contrast to see.
Yeah, CES I feel for that team, because right when, they avoided COVID, this needing to shut down in 2020, but then they got hit with the Omicron variant. I imagine they're very, very stressed. But
absolutely, events industry all around got impacted by that. But
I've been at conferences in Bratislava, like
goodness,
all over the world. So,
That's
it's always, that's a term called sort of bleisure, which is business and leisure. And
I love that.
But it makes sense, because, if you are a conference, if your business is to host conferences, you want to get people saying, hey, I want my company to host this, but I also want to travel there.
Exactly. No, 100%. A destination travel. A little bit of a personal thing I'm curious about, maybe or maybe not. We've got a conference collective coming up. What would you say is your number one tip for someone who's looking to host like a conference or event? And what's the number one thing you would say on the flip side that people don't think about enough, or that people should focus more on?
I think it would be that the details matter. And it's just like a couple $1,000 here and there for decor, for like a fun entertainer. I think those are the memories that people walk away with. And so just like to spend the time on those extra little details, if you have the budget or can get like a sponsor to cover the cost, because that's the thing people will remember, in addition to the location, if location is flexible. And I also want to address your earlier question on what is the Vendry? What do we do? So I'll give you sort of the elevator pitch, which is the live events industry is $1 trillion global market. And yes, COVID put a dent in it, but basically our thesis is it's coming back, and it's going to come back. And that you, as an early startup, we look at the 5-year view. We're not dealing with the 6-month view. And when you look at that $1 trillion global market for live events, actually a very small percentage is like weddings and social events. I think in the US, it's like 25% of the events industry is weddings. And so that means that 75% of the industry is like professional organizations, whether it's a company like Google, an institution like Princeton, a nonprofit, a trade show or association. And these events are being produced by professionals that do this as their job on a repeat basis, all that. When they plan that event, one of the first things that they have to do is they have to find the place, the venue to host it in. That venue can be anywhere from like 40% of the overall event budget to like 90%. Right?
Yeah.
The venue's providing the food, the AV, like that single contract is basically, can be the majority of your budget. There is no online marketplace, no leading online marketplace where those event planners can go find venues. There is one notable marketplace called Cvent, which is very specific to hotel venues, where you're also getting room blocks. And I mean, there's smaller ones, but effectively there's like nothing else. So it's our mission to build the marketplace platform for these event professionals to go source venues for their events. That in itself is a multi-billion-dollar market, many multi-billion-dollar market.
Yeah.
And it's solving a major pain point.
100%. Ali and I have both planned some events in the past, and I know I'm planning one right now for April. And oh boy, we were looking at our budget, and we had like a $90K budget, and like almost half of it was just on simply the like AV system and the hotels and all of that.
Yeah. And so tell me what's the event? Now I'm curious.
Yeah, oh my goodness. So the event is a Design Nation conference. It's actually part of the Business Today conference.
I was on Business Today.
Oh my goodness. Were you part of like the international conference, Business Today? They had like
I was part of the New York conference. This is for the listeners, this is a club at Princeton that used to produce a big event at the Marriott Marquis. And I am embarrassed to say I was on the leadership team, but now I'm forgetting what exactly, I forget what function area I owned. Great team.
It's super well organized, and I'm excited to just like, it's like in New York, it's 2 days, all paid for expenses. It's highlighting like design speakers and panelists from Adobe, from Burberry, all of these awesome places. So being part of the like internal organizations, I definitely see the pain point of event booking and venue booking. And so super excited about the Vendry, but more importantly, what inspired you to create the Vendry? I know you said you kind of dipped your toes in the event space when you worked at Yext, but what inspired you to take that idea and really run with it?
I think often with entrepreneurs, you get that question, and over time and more interviews and all that, you develop your sort of apple fell on my head moment as if there's a single answer. But the truth, like being honest with you guys, is it was a variety of factors and ideas that hit me over a very short period. So like I told you, earlier that I lived in Paris for a bit. This was after I left Yext. After yoga teacher training in Cape Town, I did a bit of I call it my sabbatical. And in a very, very short period, I talked to a lot of people in events, and it was sort of random. So I was getting married, that was happening. My best friend's boyfriend was our wedding photographer. He is a professional photographer, doesn't usually do events. So I was talking to him about his career doing, company events basically. My other friend who's coming to the wedding, actually her and her husband own an experiential agency in Soho. And I was talking to her about her company, and she was like, wow, phones are ringing off the hook, like Spotify, Peloton, all these brands are throwing their money at experiential marketing. And this is all within like a 4-week period. I caught up with my friend who also came to my wedding, who was on the events team at Yext. So it was like events was just sort of very present on my mind. And what was very present on my mind as I started reading, tech news around the industry was Zola raised $100 million, I think in 2018 for the wedding industry. The Knot and Wedding Wire merged in, I think, 2019. And so there was just a lot of there was clearly a lot of activity in this whole experiential sector where it was like Gen Z, millennials, they want to post pictures on Instagram. Like they want live events and experiences. There's pop-ups all over New York City. There's festivals everywhere. And what struck me was that it was like there was a lot of investment going into the wedding sector, but tapping into both, literally my friend group that's in events, but not the wedding sector. And then my experience at Yext, I was like, the data speaks for itself. The corporate events sector is much larger. And I started interviewing more corporate event planners, understanding their pain points, and pretty quickly realized that one of the biggest ones is basically venue sourcing.
Oh, wow.
Leaned into that. I will say also that, the sector is predominantly women, and that motivated me. Like straight up, I just felt like I saw the opportunity to be a champion for like a professional demographic that I care about. Clearly you guys care about too. And if I could leverage my skill set and network to support them, that was motivating to me.
I love what you said about experiential as well. Like, I think we're over the days of getting like a cool pen or like a backpack or whatever, like the idea that you can post and share and have like that leisure experience, the business leisure. Like I can even say so myself, like I would, if a company is going to offer me between having like a cool piece of swag or something, or like a retreat-ish sort of conference somewhere cool, like I'm going to pick that because like we are all living in this flexible space where you can make your time your own thing, and you can kind of have that 9 to 5 and squeeze in things before and after. And if you can kind of squeeze in something fun and exploratory, like you said you did in Bratislava, I'm totally for it. And I love that you leaned into seeing that the corporate market was really the opportunity for that. But again, like there was no, you said, as a marketplace that existed for events to find vendors and vendors to find venues and all that sort of thing. So what was day one? You realized that this was an issue. How did you get started? What was the first thing you did?
We are a cat of 17 lives. The thing with the marketplace, I love building a marketplace. Marketplace dynamics are very complicated, but it's been like such a fun journey, an intellectual exercise for me personally. The classic question with building a marketplace company is, how do you break the chicken and egg? And how do you get planners to come to your site if you have no venues on there? And how do you get venues on your site if there are no planners? It's a waste of their time or money. So we started, the approach we took was to start as a portfolio site. And this is it takes a bit to get there. So we basically realized, we looked at venues and vendors and we studied their websites. We looked at how in an organic setting where the blank canvas is theirs, do they market themselves? And what we saw definitely with vendors and often with venues was that photography of the previous events they worked on was at the forefront. And so, for example, if you went to a production company's site, they had a tab on their website that said like portfolio. And if you clicked it, it would be like, here are photos of the Google event we did. Here are photos of the whatever Amazon event we did. And that photography was the way that they sold themselves. Now, I'll also say that on a personal level, my husband is an architect. And so I think I intuitively understood this idea that like you spend all this time working on an event and then you just want the photography out there in the world. And that is for the home design industry, what House did for architects. It gave them a site on which to host their portfolio and also tag a lot of metadata to those photos that made it very like searchable, maybe more so than the, Squarespace site. So we basically did the same thing for event venues and vendors, where we gave them a place online. We built a business profile for them that, unlike a general Yelp profile, like built into that profile was the ability for them to upload photos of their previous work, tag it as like it was disco themed, it was in LA, it was 500 people, it was a festival, and then build a search experience on our site where you could say, show me photos of festivals in LA that were disco themed, and not just see the photography, then also see what venue it was hosted at and what vendors worked on it. So all this to say, if you're asking for my step one, the approach we took looks very similar to what House, H-O-U-Z-Z did, which is we actually launched a platform that said, hey, venues and vendors, build free profiles, upload photos. And we didn't really promise them like tomorrow you're going to get a lead. We basically said, we are a new industry platform where you can get photos of your work out there. And they valued that because, they're looking, we invested heavily in design early on so that even if they had never heard of the Vendry, when they came to our site, it was a brand that they were down to be affiliated with, which was a big learning lesson for me, because I would say that the business we built at Yext, having top-notch design was not like, strategically that important in the early years. And the other thing, the types of things we would do to build sort of credibility within the industry when we had no name and we were an unknown entity was via like business development, would develop industry relationships with people sort of important within our sector. We had launched a blog early on. We would do interviews with them and sort of leverage the fact that they knew us personally, knew we were legit good people, to then also leverage their branding on LinkedIn and on Instagram to add credibility to who we were.
Wow. I love how you were able to track like the first steps. You really were able to get inspiration from other industries. I think that's super important in anything that you build. But also I love how you were able to iterate on that idea. Like you weren't stuck on this one idea of being a portfolio website, but
we've iterated.
To be able to iterate over time. What was that iteration process like? And also, what were some challenges you faced as you were building the Vendry?
Well, So our vision was to launch as a portfolio site. And in doing so, businesses were building business profiles. So we actually got off the ground as a user-generated content, which is a beautiful thing, because if you can get high quality UGC, that takes a life of its own. Great, our numbers were good. We had lots of photos being uploaded. I could paint the picture to investors of like, great, now we're gonna turn this into a proper marketplace. You know, we're gonna SEO well, we're gonna get our name out in the industry. People are gonna use us to find venues and vendors. And we raised $1 million of basically a pre-seed to help just advance the platform a little bit more, build a bigger team before raising a proper seed. And 6 weeks later, the pandemic hit. And so this is where I think it's really important to highlight serendipity. I mean, I honestly, every entrepreneur wants to say that they could, like, you know, we would have figured it out, but like, honestly, we were so indexed on live events. I cannot tell you that, like, if I had fundraised 2 months later, we definitely would have raised money. Like, we were, you know, nobody was leaving their homes. And so the good news is we had money. The other good news, which is sort of dumb luck, is that I had hired a brilliant CTO and brilliant CMO with a design background. Like the CTO joined 4 weeks before the pandemic. The CMO, her first day was our first day of remote work. And so luck, we had money, and we had a very strong early team that could basically fill every key function, like business, design, and marketing, and product and tech. And so to answer your question on like, what challenges do we face, or how did the vision evolve? Well, guess what didn't really seem to make sense at that moment in time was investing in being a venue marketplace because nobody was looking for venues. And so we went back to the drawing board, and fortunately for us, we weren't lacking ideas what to do, because something that had happened when production companies were, say, uploading photos of that Google event was we were starting to get emails from the people working at the brands. So let's say a woman that runs events at Google emailing us saying, I see photos of this event on your site. Not can you take it down because it was a public event, but I was the producer. Can you credit me?
Wow.
And I was like, first of all, I loved it, because even before the pandemic, I was like, if we can become like the IMDb for the events industry, that just organically brings the whole ecosystem onto the Vendry. And so when the pandemic hit, we were like, okay, we already sort of started developing this vision of let individual people get credited to events on the Vendry, host their portfolios on the Vendry, not just like companies. And when the pandemic hit, what was instantly clear was like, first of all, the events industry, I think it's fairly intuitive to anybody, was devastated by the pandemic. It was very sad. It was really, really terrible. A lot of people, you know, their livelihoods were threatened, all that. Obviously, it was a broader issue with the pandemic. But so we leaned into the idea of building an online community for this industry on the backbone of this tech platform where people could have profiles, their resumes, and we added features like discussion boards and virtual events and networking. And we just leaned hard into building that, and we did it fairly successfully. So we have over 21,000 members that are part of our professional community of event professionals.
Yeah, I like what you said about the IMDb for events too. Like, I was listening to this podcast yesterday about the founder of Zillow, and like, what's so crazy about a lot of these marketplaces before they're exposed or before they're created is all of this information is not public. Like, it all kind of exists, but what if people could share, like you said, that producer being credited, like that existed, that data or that interaction happened. Like, what happens if you put it out into the universe? And it's good things. Like, it's that person should get credit for what they were doing. So I love that you were able to get in.
I'll actually call out that in any environment, look, when a startup disrupts anything, there were people that were winning from the status quo and people that were losing. And so whenever, I'm sure that I don't know the real estate market well enough, but I'm sure when Zillow launched, there were people that felt that their jobs were threatened because of this new, you know, public information resource. And so yeah, it's funny, like people getting credited to their work is good for that person, but maybe their employer doesn't like it because it makes them more poachable. So you're always going to ruffle some feathers.
For sure.
Yeah,
And
it as well about like disruption and being able to do something different.
Yeah.
I love that. Well, you mentioned that COVID-19 was kind of when you started to build out your team. Besides that, how were you able to adapt the Vendry to host virtual events as well? And also, we were checking and stalking your Instagram, but you've held so many amazing live events post-COVID, including like the 818 event, the Lays. So would love to hear more about how after the pandemic, you guys kind of were able to get back on your feet.
Yeah. And so one thing to be clear is that we do not produce any events. So if you look at our Instagram, and I know this is confusing, a lot of people, maybe we need to do a better job clarifying this, but like our Instagram is photography of work that has been uploaded to our site via portfolios.
Wow.
And so if you see photos on our Instagram, it's probably a production company or a venue or a vendor that's part of our marketplace that had uploaded that to their profile, and we're just using our social channels to promote their work. So you'll always see that we try to credit everyone in our comments that was involved with that event. So during the pandemic, we leaned hard into building this professional community, which includes both venues, vendors, but also the planners. So speaking in marketplace terms, we basically built a community that represented both the buy side of the marketplace and the supply side, all in one sort of general community of people in the industry. But the other thing that we actually built, which to be honest, we paid far less attention to, but we built early on in the pandemic when we were throwing everything at the wall, was a section of our site for vendors to market what virtual event services they offer. So if it's like, you're a magician and you now do magic over Zoom, or you're like wine tasting over Zoom. It was a lot of mostly entertainment stuff, some production. And what actually happened was, I think we were one of the first people to launch like a virtual vendor thing on the internet. And we had very good SEO. And so what happened without us, frankly, marketing it that much or paying that much attention, is the businesses on our site were getting tons of leads. Wow. And so to answer your question on how we sort of bridged out of the virtual first world into, where we are today, is we were able to lean into the activity that was happening with Fortune 500 companies looking for vendors for virtual events, and build technology, marketplace technology around that interaction that could then translate into sourcing venues and vendors for live events. And what I mean by that is our core marketplace is actually not just a search site. We have search on our website. We're going to make it better. There's lots of room for improvement. But for the last year, we've been building what we call an RFP tool. Do you know what RFP is? Okay, so it stands for request for proposal. And so the idea being that like our marketplace dynamic is not one in which instant booking is really the nature of the transaction. So, Weilyn, you maybe were part of the team that sourced that venue for the hotel for this upcoming conference in April. And like, it's not like you went to a website and like entered your credit card and clicked to book, right? Mm-hmm. You're talking to multiple hotels, you're doing multiple site visits, you're negotiating multiple contracts until the very final line. And so an RFP platform is one in which, say, the Google event planner can come to the Vendry, can fill out a bunch of information about what he or she is looking for. It publishes basically a single, virtual document that can be shared with multiple hotels or venues. And then they all submit proposals through the Vendry, and all those workflows can happen in a single spot.
Wow.
And so we built that for the virtual event vendors, but in a way that could easily then translate to live events as those started coming back.
That's amazing. And just the fact that you don't have to like go to the venues and like actually do site visits. I know that I didn't personally do site visits, but the ladies who did do the site visits, they spent like days and days just like going back and forth to different venues, negotiating prices, going and like signing contracts, calling them. And it wasn't until they signed that final contract, was it like final, everything was still up in the air. So I love this idea of bringing it all on one platform where it's easy for almost the person who wants to organize the event, alleviates a lot of their stress.
Yep,
Absolutely.
that's the vision. Not all the way there, but we're getting there.
I'm sure you've answered this a million times and you've been able to think about what could have been different or how you would have done things in another way. But when COVID hit and everyone was like paralyzed with not being able to do live events, what was your first impression and mode of action to adapt?
Here's the truth is like, compared to most other companies in the world, we were fine because like from a financial perspective, our burn was very low. We had 18 to 24 months of run rate. We had a strong team. We have great investors behind us. And so if anything, I was sort of watching the world around me, crumble in many ways. And that was very stressful on a personal level. But for us, like, we had the time and the team with which to figure something out, and we did. And so the truth is, it wasn't that stressful. If I had to fundraise during that, you'd be hearing a different story. And two is if the Vendry did not have the team that we had in place, but we had the team. And that's where for any like early, for any entrepreneur, I think they say the first 10, the first 20 employees, like that is make it or break it. Like if we hadn't had the team, we wouldn't be anything, but we had the skill set to like make good of the situation.
I love that. And I do think that you attribute some of that to luck, but also a lot of it was the idea that you're building is something that honestly, I feel like a lot of people can get behind. It's clearly a very obvious pain point for any event organization. So it's really cool to see you building it and continuing to iterate it even post-COVID. Kind of switching gears slightly, I'd love to talk to you a little bit about like the nitty-gritty of networking. So I know that networking can be really tough. And as college students, Ali and I are trying to build our networks to explore career options. But I imagine for the Vendry, just reaching out to people and sharing, especially at that earlier portfolio stage, networking was huge. So do you have any tips for how to network well? And what's a number one kind of networking mistake that you see people make?
I'll have to think about the mistake. I think a lot comes down to personality. Like, I would say that I'm pretty extroverted. I really like meeting people. Like, I like people. Yeah, so I think networking has always come fairly naturally to me because to me, I don't think of it as much as networking, but more like meeting cool people. I think, one of probably the common traits of people that have developed strong professional networks is that they understand to try to give twice as much as they could ever expect to get. And so, I guess here goes into the mistake, but like the wrong way to network is to like take. And there's actually one of my favorite business books. I'm totally going to butcher how you actually say his name. I think it's called, I haven't read it in a decade, Influence the Power of Reciprocity by Robert Cialdini. And I think it's the first chapter might be specifically about like the biology behind reciprocation, which is like, it's literally, it gives so many examples, like the Hare Krishna person forcefully giving you a flower or whatever, and then asking for a donation. Like everybody wants to have a clean balance sheet with the world around them. And if you just like give to your network in a way that really aids them, like the karma will come back to you. And that's by facilitating good introductions with other people they might want to meet, lending them 20 minutes of your time for advice, whatever it is, giving them a reference.
I love that. I didn't realize the author, he also did the psychology of persuasion. So he's definitely in that same vibe of sharing that. I love what you said also about it being sort of this mutualism in a way that doesn't necessarily happen in like, okay, I do this to you, now you do this, not like a transaction, almost not to get too like spiritual, but like the kind of the universe's karma in some way. Like even I think Weilyn and I have been really lucky in the last few years, especially to be given great advice from experienced entrepreneurs, people we look up to. And I'm not sure if we're yet at a stage that we can offer them so much help or so much advice. Sometimes we can, but I think it's a matter of sort of paying it forward to the next generation, someone else. So kind of on that note, if someone reached out to you looking to create maybe something in a derivative of what you're doing in the space of marketplaces or events, and you had to give them like 3 top pieces of advice to pay it forward, what would you share with them?
I do use that word pay it forward a lot because I don't know, I guess there have been times in my life when I've helped somebody and you can tell that they're like, how can I help you or something? And I'm always like, pay it forward. I feel like often in these scenarios, it's been, don't pressure yourself to have to give back now. Like in 10 years, when you're an executive, like remember, the intern or the college kid that reached out and like pay it forward that way. And so, it's funny because I think that phrase gives people comfort because they know they can pay it forward. They and like need to alleviate the pressure of paying it back. I don't know if that answered your question. But
No, I love that. And I think it's really important, even for like Gen Zs or people who are just entering the workforce, to be reminded that they too can like pay it forward and that they can help out. Like when I talk to different executives or people who are like working at companies I'm interested in, I oftentimes feel like I'm just like asking them, I'm like, hey, can you like give me a job? Or like not in that exact context, but it always feels like they're helping me more than I can help them. So something that I try to do is like I just offer what I can do. Like if there's anything at all that I can help with, like let me know. I give them my email. I reach out to them if they're working on a podcast or need to get in touch with women entrepreneurs. But kind of just taking a step back and seeing how can I actually help and just offering it. Maybe they don't need it at all, but I think it's important to say like it's not only one way.
100%. And I literally did that the other day. Like I emailed the CEO of a very big company that I know asking for 30 minutes of his time to just like pick his brain. Mm-hmm. He was very gracious, and 48 hours later, I had an hour-long call with him. And it's like, it is completely a one-way value proposition, right? But still, in like my email afterwards, I just, said, hey, like I'm here to support you however I can, just to make sure that that door's open. And I think the other thing I would call out which goes against what I literally just said, where I was like, it was a sort of one-way value proposition, is that I think younger generations don't need to underestimate how much like older, powerful, richer, whatever people can also leverage them. I mean, even right now at the Vendry, like we're constantly trying to hire smart interns and smart new grads. And as I get older, my personal network stops being valuable there. And so I'm literally texting and emailing all the young people I know, basically saying like, help, send us good people. So yeah.
It's so interesting hearing from like the other side of it as well. Like I only know kind of like from my experience networking, but also just hearing that like you've done the same thing where you offer your help, but as they're like tapping into younger people, it's kind of crazy to see like how different networking experience are like throughout your life even. So yeah, that's really crazy.
What's been interesting for me is a couple times in the last year, I have been at a dinner or in environments where I'm with people that I would consider much more important, powerful, whatever than me. And I've noted that they take a very active interest in connecting with me. And what I've sort of learned from that experience, I'm like sort of middle-aged right now or whatever, is that I think really successful people always want to stay in touch with like the younger generations And so there is value. This is also me saying, like, don't underestimate as a 22-year-old Princeton grad or whatever, like how much the smartest, most successful people are going to not want to lose touch with the smart younger generations. And so it is a two-way relationship that can be worth like investing in.
I think you're totally right. I think you're absolutely right. In order, like, Web3 alone, being able to innovate in technology, sharing opinions, even if you don't want to get in technology so much, so it's literally the next market of people who are your next consumers. Yeah, I think so well put, so well put in terms of connecting and stuff like that. But let's say you go to an event and you meet someone cool, someone you like. What are your tips, or what experiences have you seen from the conferences that you've attended about ways that are good to maintain those connections? Is it sending them an email? Is it reaching out? How do you maintain a connection with someone that you meet and you feel passionate about, but not necessarily like we have to start a business right now? It's just like, I like them and I want to keep in touch.
Yeah, I think, okay, the first tip is going to be very basic. Get connected on LinkedIn. Send a follow-up email that either offers something that might be of value to them, or actually offers nothing and asks nothing, just says, hey, it was really lovely to meet you, would love to keep in touch. And the other thing I would say is, like, especially through LinkedIn, which definitely plays a big part of my professional life, like, don't hesitate to reach out. Like, you see that they're doing something cool, even if it's been 5 years, even if they might not remember you. I mean, I experience this in my daily life. Just reach out and say, like, hey, you might not remember me, but we met at XYZ event. I think LinkedIn is probably the best way to keep in touch with what they're up to from a professional level. Lean into that.
I think
college students should build out their LinkedIn early on. Like, make sure you're sort of tapped into your network there.
Yeah, I think even speaking from personal experience, when we started this podcast, honestly, we probably knew like 2 women entrepreneurs each, if that. And so one of the great things that we always say on this podcast that we did early on is, like, we had a good LinkedIn, but also we're able to ask like every single woman entrepreneur we had on, and we were like, can you connect us with like 2 other entrepreneurs?
Yeah.
Do you know 2 other people who might be on this podcast? And growing that way as well. But definitely a little bit of imposter syndrome when we first started, where we were like, why would these big women entrepreneurs want to talk to us at like a starting podcast? But that's a whole other journey we could talk about.
Yeah, you guys are entrepreneurs too. Yeah.
And so as we move into the final part of this podcast, we have a couple of questions we always ask our guests that we would love to ask you today. But to start us off, what is something that you love about yourself today?
In this moment in time, I would say that I'm very happy and at peace with my work-life balance. And that's something that might be a funny response for an entrepreneur, but like, I have 2 little boys. I have a 6-month-old and a 3-year-old.
Wow.
And I think that I literally am talking right now. Who knows? Talk to me in 2 months. I'm in a good place of balancing being an entrepreneur who like cares deeply to make this company successful, but also being a present parent.
That's super hard. Like, that's not an easy task at all.
Hard.
So be able to share that you love that and that it's something that you're proud of.
And I meant it's not easy. I was like, it's not hard.
No, that's not hard. It's hard. Yeah, it's not hard to, yeah, exactly. On the same note, what is something that you are grateful for today?
Grateful for the team that I work with every day. I'm grateful that I get to count them as coworkers, because they're very good. And good is not just skill, intellect, the attitude they bring to the office every day, the culture. Like, without that, I think it would be very hard to build a company. And that is very motivating to me. And obviously, since I spend 40+ hours a week with them, it's very just personally, gratifying.
I love that. And as a founder, I I just like love the way that you speak about your team and just hold them to like such a standard as well. I love the way that you clearly have such a good relationship with your team and like really want the company to succeed almost on their behalf. So yeah.
And it's funny because I do say my team or something like that. And I try not to, because that's not how I want to think about it. So I think I tried to correct myself earlier and I was like the Vendry's team. Because look, yeah, it's a little language thing. And I try to correct myself sometimes, but like, you know, everyone here is here on their own. And like, we collectively are a team.
I love that. That's, oh, what a great note to end on. But one more question before we finish. What does it mean to you to be an entrepreneur?
I want to create. And I think that's what it is. Like I have a deep burning desire within me to create, and my husband, who I referenced earlier, is an architect, and so his form of creation is in design and buildings, and mine is in companies. And sorry, his is company too, I guess, tech companies. And so in a way right now, like, you know, we are early enough that as a company, we're autonomous enough that I feel that my ability to create is sort of in my own hands and with the team around me.
I absolutely love that. And
my gut reaction.
I love how you attribute entrepreneurship to being able to create, because that expands what the word entrepreneurship is traditionally known as. And everyone can create to a certain extent. So I think there leaves a lot of hope, especially for younger generations in that definition. To end us off, though, for our audience who want to continue to follow your journey, I want to continue to follow the Vendry's journey. How and where can they do that?
Yeah. LinkedIn, I feel like you should be their spokesperson. You can follow me on LinkedIn, you can follow the Vendry on LinkedIn, you can follow the Vendry on Instagram. If you're in the events industry, we have a great weekly newsletter that goes out every Thursday with industry news. So you can go to thevendry.com/newsletter. Those are some channels.
I love it. Well,
come to us if you're looking for a venue.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. We loved having you on and sharing your story. And absolutely, if you're looking for a venue, definitely check out Vendry. We'll have everything linked below.
Awesome. Thank you, Allie. And thank you, Weilyn.
That wraps it up for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. We hope hearing from Daphne about the Vendry helped you learn more about networking, building, and maintaining connections. If you liked this episode, subscribe to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening to this podcast now. Even better, please leave us a 5-star review and share your thoughts on the podcast. Want to get in touch, send a question, or suggest a guest? We read every one of our emails and DMs, so please feel free to reach out to us via our email or at the Entrepreneurs Network on all social media platforms. You can also check out the show notes on more ways to chat. The Entrepreneurs Podcast is one of the shows under the Entrepreneurs Network. Each podcast show explores its own niche community on women entrepreneurs. To explore our other shows, please follow us at the Entrepreneurs Network on all socials. Thank you so much for our amazing team at the Entrepreneurs Network, and especially today's episode's producers, Zoe and Chandni.